Transmigrated as a child's mother, striving to become a winner. Chapter 8. The Child's Father and Mother. Soo-young didn't notice these exchanges. He was intently looking at Jian Zhongyan, trying to memorize his face. After a while, he said, "Yeah, I understand now. Can you take me back to my mom?" He now knew what his dad looked like. At that moment, the doorbell rang. It was Assistant Zhang. Assistant Zhang held a stack of documents. He had no idea why the boss suddenly wanted information about a woman named Su Qian. Could it be that the boss was interested in her? This woman was quite pretty, but she was already a mother. Jian Zhongyan stood at the doorway and didn't let him in. Taking the documents from Assistant Zhang, he quickly instructed, postpone tomorrow's meetings and work. Keep the day after tomorrow tentative until further notice. Without waiting for Assistant Zhang to respond, he shut the door. The boss putting aside work for personal matters? This was a first, and Assistant Zhang was very surprised. With the documents in hand, Jian Zhongyan didn't go to Su Yang's room. Instead, he detoured to the balcony to review Su Qian's information. After graduating from university, she worked as a clerk in a food company, living a routine life. According to the data, Su Qian led an unremarkable life. An ordinary life usually equates to poverty. Jian Zhongyan reasonably inferred that this woman was after money. The SD magazine feature marked his first media interview and allowed the use of his photo on the cover. She must have seen it, recognized him, and decided to bring the child to find him. Since Soo-young was his son, he should rightfully stay with the Jian family to receive a proper education. He would compensate Su Qian, as she was the biological mother, but he wanted to avoid any unpleasantness. Suddenly, Jian Zhongyan paused while flipping through the documents. He recognized the woman in the photo as the same woman from yesterday on the street. Without much hesitation, he labeled Su Qian as money-grubbing, ungrateful, and mean. Picking up his phone, he dialed the number on the slip of paper Su Qian had given him. Hello, who is this?
Hello, Misu.
This is Jian Zhongyan. Su Qian was eating at that moment. Knowing he called at this time meant he had confirmed Su Yang's parentage. You've confirmed Su Yang is your biological son, right? Let's meet tomorrow at 10 a.m., Building 3, Unit 202, in Lishui Community. Okay, Jian Zhongyan agreed promptly, his eyes dark and swirling with emotion. You? He wanted to probe further into Su Qian's attitude, but before he could finish, he heard the busy signal. Had she hung up on him? Jian Zhongyan was stunned. Su Qian, distracted by accidentally spilling her porridge, hurried to clean up and then noticed she had unknowingly ended the call. She didn't mind. There wasn't much to discuss over the phone. They could talk in person tomorrow. I'll take you to see her tomorrow. After finishing the call, Jian Zhongyan went to see Soo-young and spoke to him. Okay, just Soo-young nodded, his serious expression a mirror image of Jian Zhongyan's. Soo-young clenched his left hand halfway, with his thumb rubbing over the middle of his index finger, absent-mindedly thinking. This was a habitual gesture of Jian Zhongyan's when he was deep in thought. Can this be inherited too? Jian Zhongyan's heart softened unexpectedly, realizing more keenly that the child before him was indeed his son. Can you tell me about your life all these years? For the first time, Jian Zhongyan felt like engaging in a conversation with a child. Why should I tell you? Soo-young frowned, his gaze wary. You didn't know about me before, so there's no need to know after. With his smart little mind, Soo-young had already figured out that this dad didn't know of his existence before, hence the need for a DNA test. He had seen such plots on TV, where paternity tests were done to confirm if a child was really theirs. Such men are bad dads. 5-year-old Soo-young directly dismissed him as such. Jian Zhongyan was taken aback. He hadn't expected his son to have a hostile attitude towards him. But I know now. Talking to a child, Jian Zhongyan was unsure what tone or approach to use. So what?
Su Yang retorted.
Your mother brought you here to give you to me. From now on, you'll live with me, Jian Zhongyan stated. You're lying. That's not true. Su Yong threw the water cup in front of him, towards Jian Zhongyan. When upset, 5-year-old Su Yong tended to throw things. Jian Zhongyan dodged it, his tone turning cold. Su Yong, that's rude. Didn't your mother teach you any manners? Su Yong froze, then burst into tears, shouting, I don't need you to care for me. Running back to his room, he locked the door. Jian Zhongyan felt a throbbing at his temples. Loosening his tie, he sat on the bed, running his hands through his hair. He had no idea how to interact with kids. After a long while, Jian Zhongyan knocked on the door. Come out and eat. Tomorrow I will take you to see her. There was no response from the room. If you don't come out, you'll never see your mom again. That threat got the door open. A red-eyed Su Yong came out, sat at the table, and ate expressionlessly. Jian Zhongyan pinched the bridge of his nose. This was more exhausting than a whole day of meetings. While the father and son had their tense standoff, Su Qian immersed herself in the online world after lunch. As a supporting character, being aware meant she could change her fate. Due to her illness, she had taken all her saved vacation days, amounting to 5 days off. This was the second day. Her previous phone was a generic, non-smart model that could still use WeChat. After setting up her new phone, the first message she saw was from a colleague. One from the general manager's secretary asked her to prepare meeting documents, and another from a colleague requested her to attend a training session during her vacation. Both were casual orders without even a thank you, indicating such requests were frequent. Neither task should have been her responsibility, so Su Qian replied that she was unwell and left it at that, ignoring any further replies. Despite needing money, Su Qian no longer wanted this job, which kept her busy with trivial tasks from morning till night and just barely paid enough to raise a child. In this world, Su Qian had studied fashion design but had taken a break during her second year in college due to pregnancy, resuming after childbirth. Post-graduation, she didn't pursue a career in her field, instead opting for a 9-to-5 clerical job at a food company, working there ever since. In her previous life, having been in the fashion industry, Su Qian excelled and knew how lucrative it could be. Naturally, she realized that to make money, she should leverage her specialty. Browsing the internet, Su Qian found information about a domestic fashion design competition. The top 3 winners would receive prizes and a chance to participate in an international contest, with the winner getting an opportunity to study abroad. This was a chance to elevate her status. After meeting the male lead tomorrow, she would figure out how to enter the competition. That night, Su Qian slept uninterrupted by dreams. Chapter 9. Useless Dad. Su Qian thought she would miss Su Yong, but it turned out she trusted the male lead a lot when it came to the child. Of course, this trust only extended to matters concerning Su Yong. The male lead wouldn't let him suffer. In contrast, the male lead was ruthless towards her, the supporting female character, in the plot. This time, she wouldn't heed her mother's advice to take drastic measures to climb up the social ladder. Su Qian had modest demands. As long as they could each live their own lives well, that would be enough. Regarding the child, with Jian's numerous servants and bodyguards, having Su Yong stay with her a few days each month for bonding would suffice. The previous Su Qian couldn't live without her son. She, however, was more independent and could accept this arrangement, which was also good for Su Yong. Lying in bed, Su Qian felt good about this before she slept, unaware that her son had inherited the male lead's stubbornness from her. A rebellious child is not easy to handle. Despite planning to leave at 9 a.m., Su Yong was already up and sitting in the living room by 7 a.m., wearing his little backpack and waiting obediently. He didn't rush Jian Zhongyan, he just sat there, watching him intently. Wherever Jian Zhongyan moved, his eyes followed. Whenever Jian Zhongyan looked at him, it was obvious from Su Yang's face that he was ready to leave, with eyes urging him to hurry up. Let's go." Ultimately unable to resist Su Yong, father and son left at 7:50 a.m. Jian Zhongyan's suit pocket held a bank card with a balance of 5 million yuan. He thought, as long as Su Qian didn't make excessive demands, he could agree. The 5 million was for her hardships over the years, and other benefits could be discussed. The child was still young and could be guided properly. He shouldn't be raised poorly under Su Qian's care. Jian Zhongyan wanted custody of the child. Su Qian lived in an old community, and she rented the place because it was cheap. Given the low cost, the conditions were subpar. The alley leading into the community was narrow, so Jian Zhongyan's car couldn't be driven in. The father and son walked, with 2 bodyguards guarding the car and 4 following behind. Upon arriving at the community, Su Yong recognized the way and visibly brightened up. He ran ahead to the door. Remembering how Su Qian had left him, Su Yong stood still at the second-floor corner, waiting for Jian Zhongyan to come and knock. A child's emotions are written all over their face. Jian Zhongyan recalled the child's plea for help the first time they met, realizing Su Qian was still important to him. As long as she wasn't too unreasonable, for the sake of the child, he could compromise. And so, Jian Zhongyan stood at the door for half an hour. After the third knock with no answer, Jian Zhongyan looked at Su Yong and said, "She's not home." "Call her," Su Yong suggested. Their faces looked incredibly similar, and even their short conversation had the same tone. No one would doubt their relationship. When the call didn't go through and the voicemail indicated that the phone was off, Jian Zhongyan said, "Should we agreed at 10 a.m.? It's only 8:35 now." Jian Zhongyan tried to reason with the child. They should go back to the car and return at the agreed time. But Su Yong didn't feel like talking. Hugging his backpack, he sat at the door, ignoring Jian Zhongyan. What could he say to a 5-year-old who wouldn't listen? Rubbing his temples, Jian Zhongyan stood and waited with him. After another half hour, Su Qian returned with leftover breakfast in a takeaway bag. She had felt something was off when she saw the luxury car at the alley entrance. The bodyguards looked familiar too. As she walked up to her unit, she understood. No wonder Aunt Wong wasn't sitting in the community pavilion this morning. She must have been scared to leave her house because of this group. Su Qian glanced at Jian Zhongyan and his 4 bodyguards. They didn't look easy to deal with, and their presence blocked the stairway so effectively that old ladies wouldn't dare to go out. "Didn't we agree on 10 a.m.? Su Qian frowned as she opened the door and glanced at Su Yong. The kid's eyes were full of anger and grievances. Who had insisted on finding his dad? Su Qian looked away, guilt-free. Both mother and son were equally stubborn. Jian Zhongyan observed her as she appeared. She didn't show the eagerness he expected, and her cool attitude seemed like a different kind of extortion to him. Just a moment," Su Qian said, then walked inside. She had no intention of inviting them in. In less than 5 seconds, she came back out with a document folder and handed it to Jian Zhongyan. "This contains Su Yang's birth certificate and immunization records. Any paperwork that needs to be done, just call me. Goodbye." With that, she closed the door. Jian Zhongyan didn't even get a chance to take the check out of his pocket. Seeing Su Qian ignore him, Su Yong remembered that she was angry too. He glanced at Jian Zhongyan beside him, their eyes meeting in a stare-off. Su Yang's face was full of resentment. The guy had said he would plead for him, yet he hadn't said a word. Did Su Qian really not want him anymore? The more Su Yong thought about it, the sadder he became, sniffling as he grumbled at Jian Zhongyan. "He, useless. Jian Zhongyan. Miss Su, I think we need to talk." Jian Zhongyan knocked on the door again. Su Qian had had a nightmare that morning. She dreamt of the original character's tragic end. The vivid dream made her empathize with the original character's pain. She woke up gasping for air and drenched in cold sweat. In the dream, the male lead's gaze was as cold as ice, with a powerful oppressiveness that was suffocating. Having barely calmed down after breakfast, Su Qian planned to prepare herself to face him later. Who knew Jian Zhongyan would come early? The creepy feeling she had finally shaken off from the nightmare returned. Hearing Jian Zhongyan speak outside, Su Qian told herself she wasn't the original character and wouldn't follow her path. Who did he think he was? She wasn't the pathetic original character. And nothing had happened yet, everything was still in her control. After mentally fortifying herself, Su Qian opened the door with a blank expression and said, Come in." Finally stepping in, Jian Zhongyan discreetly surveyed the place. It was small but very tidy. Mr. Jian, please excuse me. I need to speak with Su Yong alone first," Su Qian said, looking at Su Yong. Come to the bedroom with me." Su Yong wanted to refuse, but Su Qian didn't give him the chance. Though he wanted to show his defiance, no one seemed to care. Su Qian had already gone into the bedroom. Pouting, Su Yong put his backpack on the coffee table and followed her. Chapter 10. Su Qian, come get me. Jian Zhongyan's fingers tapped rhythmically on his leg. He didn't ponder over what Su Qian intended to do. It was no more than a ploy to ask for more money. His gaze shifted to the wall behind the television, which was covered with photos, every one of them mother and son pictures. He stood up and walked closer for a better view. From the baby's first 100 days to his 4th birthday with a cake, the photos filled the entire wall. Su Qian had meticulously documented Su Yang's growth. It felt as if he was watching Su Yong grow up from a baby to his current self, right before his eyes. Gazing at the cheerful child in the photos who looked remarkably like him, a soft expression appeared in Jian Zhongyan's eyes. Su Yong bore such a striking resemblance to him that he had accepted the reality of having a son. At this moment, the bedroom door opened, and Su Qian emerged. Jian Zhongyan noticed that 20 minutes had passed without him realizing it. Let's talk on the balcony," Su Qian said as she walked past him with an indifferent attitude, neither flattering nor resentful. Jian Zhongyan's eyes darkened with thought as he followed her. The balcony in the old community was quite spacious. Su Qian had set up a table and some plants there, indicating that the original character, though living frugally, still paid attention to living well. Su Yong will stay with you, and I need visitation rights for 2 days each month. Of course, if the child wants to come over, you can send him. If he doesn't, we can skip it. You can raise other concerns, Su Qian said. She didn't have much patience left. She'd spent quite some time persuading her son and didn't want to waste more on this conversation with Jian Zhongyan. She had no interest in the love-hate dynamics between the male and female leads. Once this was settled, she wanted to get on with her own life. Jian Zhongyan took a card out of his pocket and placed it on the table. This is 5 million yuan, as compensation for raising him over the years. Okay, thank you, Su Qian replied without hesitation, taking the card without ceremony. She would save the money for Su Yang's future. The hardship was borne by the original character, and she felt undeserving of this 5 million after just 2 days of scant care. For matters involving legal guardianship, contact me a day in advance, and I will comply with all paperwork, Su Qian said plainly, solely focused on settling her son's affairs. All right. Jian Zhongyan agreed. After a moment of thought, he added, do you have any other requests?
Su yin tvirlet her finger slightly, similink inyartly.
The male lead seemed to think she would make outrageous demands and now perceived her cooperation as a ploy. I only ask one thing. Be good to the child. He has suffered a lot with me. Naturally. Jian Zhongyan glanced at the bedroom door, his gaze darkened. Why hasn't Su Yong come out? He's packing his things. Then it's settled, Su Qian said, standing up and extending her hand. Jian Zhonyan shook it, a mutual understanding reached. Su Yong didn't want to go with Jian Zhonyan. Su Qian had persuaded him that he should spend some time with his father, maybe 10 to 15 days. When he returned to kindergarten, he could talk about his dad with the other kids, and they wouldn't tease him for not having one. She had assured him that her home was always his home, and he could return any time. Despite his precocity, Su Yong couldn't see that this was a delaying tactic by his mother. Su Qian figured that once Su Yong stayed with the male lead and found that life was better and more fun, he might not want to return. If Su Yong ended up crying and wanting to come back, it would mean he wasn't happy with the male lead, and Su Qian could bring him back to care for him. However, she considered this less likely. Despite his seemingly cold nature, the male lead was quite responsible towards this unexpected son. In reality, Su Yong didn't have much to pack. Su Qian had simply given him the task to facilitate her discussion with Jian Zhonyan. But when she returned to the room later, she found that Su Yong had even packed a broken corner from the bedside table into his suitcase, along with a tangled mess of items like lamp cords and phone cases. Su Xiaoyong, do you want to take the load-bearing wall with you too? At her question, Su Yong looked up in confusion and replied, "Huh." He pushed and squeezed things inside his little dolphin suitcase, making room in a corner, and patted the empty spot, saying, What's a load-bearing wall? There's still space, I can take it.
Sukyan.
A load-bearing wall was indeed a difficult concept for a child to grasp. Su Yong didn't want to go. He wanted to stay for dinner, but Su Qian hadn't bought groceries and didn't want to face the male lead's icy demeanor. That won't work. Mom has some business to attend to. Let Dad take you to eat something nice, okay? Su Yong pouted and looked up at the man beside him, hoping Jian Zhonyan would help. But Jian Zhonyan simply took the suitcase and said, let's go. Su Yong left, dejected, stealing glances back, thinking he would stay with his dad for 10 days at most before coming back to Su Qian, whom he believed couldn't live without him. Jian Zhonyan noticed Su Yang's low spirits. He was very dependent on his mother. Remembering how Su Qian had efficiently taken the 5 million and neatly sorted everything else, while contemplating how Su Qian's seemingly straightforward approach might conceal hidden motives, he frowned slightly. In business, people with her demeanor often had the most to hide. They appeared to act in the open but had uncountable secretive methods and unpredictable intentions. First impressions matter, and Jian Zhonyan couldn't forget how Su Qian had bossed around an elderly person on the street, which didn't seem like the behavior of a kind person. Su Qian believed her reasonable attitude would leave a good impression on the male lead. They wouldn't become friends, but at least they could be civil for the child's sake. Little did she know that her sincere behavior had made the male lead more suspicious. Of course, even if she knew, she wouldn't care. The male lead wasn't worth her effort. She needed to focus on preparing for the competition. The fashion industry in this world had a lot of material she needed to study. After sending off Su Yong, Su Qian quit her old job. The kindergarten principal, upon learning that Su Yong had moved to live with his father and wouldn't be returning, proactively refunded the tuition fees. Adding the return tuition to her savings, Su Qian realized she had enough to cover her expenses for the competition. She then immersed herself in preparations, more diligently than she had ever studied for exams. However, her peaceful routine only lasted 3 days. On the 4th day at noon, after finishing lunch, Su Qian received a call from an unknown number. The moment she answered, she heard Su Yong crying. Mom, take me home. I want to go home, sob sob sob, come get me wah. Through the phone, Su Yang's cries were heart-wrenching, as if he had suffered a great grievance. Welcome to subscribe to my channel. Thank you for following Wonder Comics.